So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our presentation and discussion on securing the human right to water on tribal lands. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our fantastic speakers that we have today, everyone that's here in person, in the room, and all of you that are joining us online. If you have any issues with hearing us or seeing what you think you need to be seeing, please put that into the chat, and we try to get that fixed. It's good to see such a good turnout, online and, also in person in COVID days, for such an important topic. For those of you that don't know us, my colleague Clare Pace and I are hosting this event today. And Claire is a researcher at UC Berkeley and the Water Equity Science Shop there, and a key developer of the drinking water tool. And my name is Stewart-Frey. I'm a member of the Faculty in Environmental Studies and Sciences here at Santa Clara University. I'm also a co-coordinator of the Environmental Justice and the Common Good Initiative. And we're both organizing this event as part of the Northern California Network for Community Academic Partnerships for Environmental Justice. There are other campus organizations that have supported this event, the Environmental Justice and the Common Good Initiative on campus, the Office for Diversity and Equity and Inclusion, and also the Department of Environmental Studies and Sciences. So let us begin with acknowledging the Native American communities on whose homelands we gather here today. We pause to acknowledge that Santa Clara University sits on the land of the Ohlone and the Moveca Ohlone people, who trace their ancestry through the missions Dolores, Santa Clara, and San Jose. We remember their connection to this region and give thanks for the opportunity to live, work, learn, and pray on their traditional homeland. Let us take a moment of silence to pay respect to their elders and to all Ohlone people, past and present. Let us also not forget that the effects of physical and cultural genocide, oppression, and land grabs harm Native American communities through today. Acknowledging them can be a starting point, but never the end of a path towards justice. Native Americans manage the natural resources, including water, in the state sustainably for thousands of years, enjoying a Central Valley and Tulare Lake region that was full of clean, fresh water, full of marshes, fish, birds, antelope, and other games. It's only about 200 years later that much of this region is arid and this water is contaminated. When we in the Bay Area turn on our taps, some of that clean and cheap water comes from hundreds of miles away in the Sierra Nevada, and many of us do not think twice about using that water on a daily basis. In 2012, California recognized the human right to water through Assembly Bill AB 685, the first state in the nation to legislatively do so. That is 8 years after the start of Facebook and about 53 years after we put the first man on the moon. Now in the Water Code, as section 106.3, the state statutorily recognizes that every human being has the right to safe, clean, affordable, and accessible water, adequate for human consumption, cooking, and sanitary purposes. Yet 1 million Californians today do not have access to clean or safe drinking water. A disproportionate number of them tribal members. So how is it that so many people in the state that belong to First Nations cannot access or afford safe water? The reasons for these inequities are manifold, and we will hear from our speakers today about those. We are very pleased to introduce our two wonderful speakers today. The first one here that, it was very generous enough to come from Sacramento to visit us here at Santa Clara is Bidtah Becker, who we would like to welcome in person. She's the Deputy Secretary for the Environmental Justice, Tribal Affairs, and Border Relations at the CalEPA. She's a member of the Navajo Nation and a national leader who has devoted her entire career to combating environmental injustices, uplifting communities of color, and furthering tribal water and energy rights. She has served in many, many capacities, too many to list here in a brief introduction, but she's been the head of the Navajo Nation Division of Natural Resources, overseeing 12 departments, including agriculture, parks, forestry, land development, mine remediation, and water resources with a staff of over 500. She has served with the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority, where she was instrumental in advancing the development of the Navajo Valley Water Supply Project, the $1.5 billion project that will provide clean and reliable water to tribal communities. And she has served on the Water and Tribes Initiative in the Colorado River Basin, where she co-chaired the Universal Access to Clean Water effort on the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission. Bidtah holds a BA in Foreign Service, School of Foreign Service, Georgetown University, with a specialty in Latin American Studies and a JD from the University of New Mexico School of Law. Please join me in welcoming Bidtah.
Before we hand off the mic, I also want to introduce our other speaker today. Heather Tanana, who's an assistant professor at the University of Utah Law School and also associate faculty at the Johns Hopkins Center for American Indian Health. Heather's also a member of the Navajo Nation. She's received recognition for her work related to tribal communities, the environment, and public health, including awards from the Natural Resources and Environmental Law section of the Utah State Bar, the Utah Minority Bar Association, and the Environment, Energy, and Resources section of the American Bar Association. Heather founded the Indian Law section of the Utah State Bar Association. She holds a Master of Public Health from Johns Hopkins University and a JD from the University of Utah. And she practices law in state, federal, and tribal courts. Heather's research explores the overlay between environmental and health policy, promotes better practices in Indian child welfare, and addresses criminal justice in Indian country. We're so pleased to have them both join us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having us. Remind me how much time we have. Did we say 20 minutes for presentation?
We have until 1.
Okay.
So we will spend the remainder of the time in discussion.
So Heather is online, and so I'm going to start, then we'll switch to her, and then she'll come back to me. And before I get started, I love to know who I'm speaking with. So I see some undergraduates. Can you raise your hand? And I'm really excited to see you because I have a 16-year-old who's ending, his junior year. So I'm like, he's going to be like you one day, before I know it. And then what is the class you're in? It looks like you all are from the same class. Did I get that right? And you're looking to somebody to answer that. Big guns.
Environmental studies and sciences majors, probably.
Oh, so your majors in environmental. Great, welcome. I see a lot of professors. I'm assuming you could be undergraduates, but I don't. Just if you just shout out what you're teaching.
Civil engineering.
Oh, nice.
Environmental communication.
Nice. I met civil.
Environmental law.
Environmental law.
Water resources management.
Oh, water resources, excellent. And you guys are undergraduates back there? Yeah, no, graduate.
No, I work with the water agencies in supporting tribes throughout the Bay Area.
Oh, so you are with.
I'm with the California Indian Environmental Alliance.
Nice to meet you.
He's
Welcome.
one of the people that will be joining us.
Oh, okay, great. So nice to meet you. And then Professor.
Environmental engineering.
Oh, excellent.
Bioengineering, electrical engineering. I'm a retired professor formerly in religious studies, and I am the mom of Clare.
When you said religious studies, I said, Claire. You see, it never ends. You know why I'm like, oh, I think,
Environmental science.
Nice to meet you. And I met Professor Lang. I think I got you all. And then of course I can't cover the people online. All right, let me set my timer so that I don't go too long. So this is called securing the human right to water. And as the professor mentioned, this is about drinking water. So as you know, there's many different uses of water: cultural, spiritual, environmental, ecological, and then there's also, let's not forget, industrial, municipal. But this is really focused on the aspect of turning a tap and getting clean water that will not hurt your body to human beings. So the couple of their caveats. So Heather and I met on something called the Water and Tribes Initiative effort. And that effort is focused on the Colorado River Basin, which I won't take the time to explain. And so the research was focused on the Colorado River Basin, and Heather will go into that. The situation in the Colorado River Basin is pretty distinct from what's happening in California with tribal communities. So I will be going back and forth between that. So I just wanted to make sure you are following along as we discuss the issues. Next slide, please. All right, real quick, pop quiz. Does anybody know how the U.S. Declaration of Independence refers to American Indians? I'm going to call on you. Person on the phone, what do you think? Tap the shoulder. How does the U.S. Declaration of Independence refer to American Indians? Just a guess. Just pick a word.
Doesn't?
It does. It uses the words to describe. I'll give one more person a guess. You look interested. What do you think? The Declaration of Independence, right? So this is before the United States is created. You've got 13 colonies. How do you think they felt about Native people? Savages. We're savages. How many federally? So these words are very important if we're going to talk about California tribal communities. Let me back up while we wait for the slide to get on. Is anybody in here Native? I think you are. Are you? What tribe are you?
Choctaw.
Oh, you're Choctaw from Oklahoma. So not even. So both of us, not even a California tribe. Anybody? Do any of you have friends who are Native? Do you know Native? Okay. Any Native students here at Santa Clara that you know of? There are some. Okay. All right. Well, so I'm a lawyer by training, and the thing that the law does is it categorizes, right? People and things. Federally recognized, we're both from federally recognized tribes. The Ohlone people who we talked about, they are not federally recognized. Some states, California does not do this. Some states will recognize a group of people as a tribe. One of the biggest tribes in the country is recognized by North Carolina. The Lumbee people, they've been trying to get what's called federal recognition forever, and they, fingers crossed, they get it. That being said, let me not go down that path. If you're wondering, do I need to be federally recognized to be a Native? My mom used to always say, I don't need the federal government to tell me I'm Navajo. I know I'm Navajo. But for legal purposes, it's necessary. And so what this presentation is going to be focused on is the federally recognized tribes. So what we're talking about today doesn't necessarily apply to the Ohlone people, but I just wanted to put that out there. Mm-hmm. So how many federally recognized tribes are there? Sybil, I think you might know.
Oh, gosh, 500.
Right. 574 federally recognized tribes. Alaska has the most number. California has the second highest number. Who knows? And I know you know that, Sybil, so I'm not going to call on you. Who knows how many? I'm going to pick on the engineer. How many California federally recognized tribes are there?
I'll say 50.
doubled it.
Okay.
109 federally recognized tribes in California. The initiative that Heather and I worked on, that Professor Tanana will be talking about, 30 federally recognized tribes. So the work, so Professor was mentioning that I spent my career with the Navajo Nation. So it's quite a leap to come here and go from working with just a handful of tribes to 109. And then lastly, okay, that's the pop quiz. You all did great. Next slide. And if you saw the cartoon, this is a famous, his name is Richard Cate, C-A-T-E. You can look him up on Twitter right now. Tap his shoulder, you tell him to look on it. He's great. He has a funny, I actually have a painting of his in my house. So I have two homes. I'm a resident of Sacramento, but my family did not move out here. I started this position in January because I wasn't going to make my kids move here after COVID. And he's Pueblo Indian, and he has a funny picture of making fun. We have a funny painting where he's making fun of Navajos. I'll tell you that during lunch if you are interested. All right, so why are we even here today? This is more of a national presentation, not so much a California presentation, meaning California, as Professor mentioned, has been addressing the fact that people lack access to clean drinking water for a long time. If you ever get the chance to meet the people who were behind that movement to get the human right to water, they're amazing individuals. There's a documentary called Thirst for Justice. And one of the people in the movement was telling me how it was hard to watch that because some of the people she started with are no longer with us. But nationally, COVID shined a huge light on the inequities of water, right? In 2019, I'm going to start at the bottom and then work the way up. 2019, so before COVID hit, a report was issued by the U.S. Water Alliance. And they shared some statistics, and it was about access to clean drinking water. And the bottom three items are from their report. Race is the strongest predictor of water and sanitation access. By sanitation, we just mean, can you flush your toilet? And do you have clean, treated water coming into your home? The other thing that the drafters found is that if you live in a Native American home, you are 19 times more likely to lack the plumbing to get a flushable toilet and be able to wash your hands than a white home. But I think what's more striking about that is that first bullet. If you live in a Latinx or Black home, you're 2 times more likely than a white home. So what's going on that, like, for Native people, it's 19 times. Well, when COVID started, there was it shined a light on that inequity. And so it really accelerated messaging and the opportunities to address the lack of access to clean drinking water in Indian country. And that's a new term that I've introduced that we can talk about later. But right when COVID hit, right away, there was a report, actually researchers out of UCLA, I should connect you all, and some other folks did some research right away within the first 2 months, trying to figure out why is COVID ravaging Indian country? Well, they found it came down to 2 things. The rate of English spoken in the community. So the higher the rate of English, the lower the rate of COVID. And the rate of access to clean drinking water in your home. The higher the rate of access to clean drinking water, the lower the rate of COVID. Now, for somebody like me who's been doing this my whole life, and I'm a lawyer by training, that's just very intuitive to me. But there are a lot of people don't understand that connection. Next slide. So very quickly, because I want to get over to Heather now, we started to share this slide because when we talk about why is it this way, well, history, right? We're products of history. And I'm sure all of you have been trained in implicit bias, right? There's stuff we have in our heads that we don't even know is in our heads. And a lot of it is reflected on this slide where, and you can see this theme, I think you can see this theme of doctrine of discovery here on campus as you walk around. And I want to be clear, and I do want to share with you, I went to a Jesuit university, as you heard. So I didn't realize Santa Clara was a Jesuit university until I started doing some research. So I think that that's a very, very interesting, I really appreciate the Jesuit training, because I was telling the faculty that I met with, the signs we had around school, and they still have them now, were men and women in service of others. So that was really drilled into our mind. But again, it's the idea that Europeans discovered this land and it was uninhabited, right? There were no human beings living here. Meaning, I don't know if you're aware that the church debated for decades, if not longer, on whether or not Native people in the Western Hemisphere were even human beings. Pre-COVID, I would have started with, most of us still don't believe Native people are human beings. I think that's still in our heads, but I do think that there's been a tectonic shift because of COVID and George Floyd, and then really some of the work that's coming out of California. But what I really want to focus on is this treaty making era, because two things, and I don't, California has a very difficult history with Native people. And it was Matthew Snip, Sybil and I have a friend in common, who taught me that really the only place in the United States where genocide happened was California. Really the only place in the United States that genocide happened is California. Because genocide, if defined as literally killing people, not marching them off and making them farmers, but killing them, state-sanctioned killing was legal in the state of California until sometime around the 1870s, 1880s. So the state would pay people to kill Native American people. I mentioned this at a conference the other week, and then somebody immediately emailed me saying, oh, there's a Kashan person who came up to me and said, that's why we don't open the door for the police. So Kashan is people who live on the Colorado River down in the southern part of the state. They don't open the door to the police because they still believe, they have a bounty on their head. So this is like a generic rendition of US policy towards Indian people. But for you in California, if you really want to work with the 109 federally recognized tribes, and then there's 69 other tribes that are on something called the Native American Heritage List, learn California history. And there's a new book that came out last year called We Are the Land. We Are the Land. It's lovely. So in theory, we're in a self-determination period right now. I just say in theory, because one of the things I'll talk about later is there are some tribes in California that don't even have land, right? How do you self-determine your community if you don't even have land? So let me turn it over now to Heather to take over, and then I'll jump in at the very end.
Yeah, thanks, Bidtah. And I just want to say, we've always found it's important for people who don't regularly work with tribal communities to provide this history, because it's not something that the average American receives, whether it's in elementary school or even at a college level. That pop quiz, I can tell you, maybe I get on average 5 people in the room get all the questions right. And no big surprise that here in our virtual land, it was our 2 Indigenous participants. They knew exactly that the declaration referred to Indigenous people in this country as merciless Indian savages, right? The full phrase. We know our history, but most people do not. And you can't talk about present day issues without spending a little bit of time understanding how we got to, this day and age where Bitcoins and, space travel, all this stuff, and yet we still have many homes that do not have access to water, and not by their choice. And so that next slide, after this time frames, right, that's what all the attorneys learn if you take a federal Indian law class, about these eras of how the federal government broadly treated tribes and Native Americans. But if we can get to the next slide, the takeaway I want to leave with you is that it resulted in all of these structural inequities that tribal communities are facing today. And there's a really great report that came out in December of 2018 by the US Commission on Civil Rights that goes through all of these different areas and how the government had failed to uphold its promises. I mean, the report is literally called Broken Promises. And so it's resulted in food deserts, right? That was another big thing people heard in the news during the pandemic, not just that Navajo Nation, estimate 40% homes lacked water, but also that there were something like 3 to 7 at most grocery stores for a landmass the size of West Virginia, right? Those challenges, housing shortages, things like that, make it really difficult for communities to thrive and to be healthy. And then the other component is this, what's been referred to as historical trauma, right? That those experiences of prior assimilation actions or termination, or even the boarding schools, right? Well, they happened decades ago, right? We should move on, but because of historical trauma, the impacts of them, why a family today would not want to open their doors to police officers. Same thing of why families, they see a social worker and immediately still hide their children, right? Those past events do very much have present day impacts and remain in our traumatizing schools. So, right, Department of Interior just today released their report on the boarding school initiative. And one of the, first page, it says the federal Indian boarding school, these efforts by the federal government, they targeted American Indians, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian. We don't often talk about the Native Hawaiian experience during boarding school area, but it targeted these groups of people specifically to assimilate them and to take their territories, right? So just really important background context to familiarize and to make yourself familiarized, not just on the national level, but definitely what Bidtah says, because each community, while these may be common themes or experiences, each community will have their own history, their own community values, and ways that they've been impacted. So moving over to specifically to address water, although I don't think, I think we do this far too much when we work with tribes, is we isolate one issue. I'm talking about child welfare, I'm talking about criminal justice, and all of these things really overlap. But for the rest, of our presentation, we'll focus more on the water world. And if we get to the next slide, you'll see that, the lack of clean water access, this is something that our tribal leaders have been speaking publicly about and recognized again for years, and recognizing that water, it's not just critical to individual and community health, but for many of our Native communities, it also has a cultural and spiritual component as well. And that, once again, federal government, they made promises to tribes when they, particularly those that they moved onto reservations, that those would be permanent homelands, can't have a homeland without water access. And so for years, we've had testimony from tribal leaders about these challenges. They were not new. It's just that the pandemic created this opportunity. It brought national attention, and it seemed like there are other people aside from Indigenous people who were suddenly caring and supporting these measures. And so with our work, what we embarked on was trying to understand the problem better. With COVID, we heard a lot about lack of piped water. And so I'll say, like, when I first joined the team and we went in researching, we really thought that we would find the tribes in the Colorado River Basin, for many of them to have a similar experience as Navajo, where piped water delivery was lacking and a big concern. But on the next slide, you'll see we actually found, right, it's got different layers to it, and no tribe was exactly the same. And there were these different challenges or or components of obtaining and maintaining clean water access into the future that each tribe was dealing with at least one and some, all of these. And so I'll just run through each of these real briefly, because I think it'd be nice to have time for Q&A at the end and to talk about like IJA and more current work besides just the problem. So first, right, again, this was the classic media coverage you likely heard over the course of the pandemic, and what Bidtah talked about at the beginning of the research. Native Americans more likely to lack piped water services. There just isn't that infrastructure at all out in that community to begin with, right? Again, Navajo, very, very classic example of that. And they have their website. The link is written on there, a little small though, NavajoSafeWater.org. That was started again during the pandemic to kind of start documenting, and you can see the work they've done to identify these homes. Again, no perfect information out there. No single database has every single home that lacks water in the US or on tribal lands. But at least that gives us a sense of the challenge. And then on the second slide, even if you have water coming in to homes and being delivered, it's unusable. And this varies from the water being contaminated to a level where it's not meeting the relevant standards and would be unsafe for consumption. But in some situations, we also found examples where the water was meeting the water quality standards, but it had, say, a high level of iron, so it was brown, smelled funny, tasted, off, and so the community wouldn't want to use that. Who should be required to use that type of water? So there was a kind of a range, but Hopi tends to be a really good classic example of the water quality issues, because ever since the BIA put in their system back in like the 60s, they used a aquifer that had naturally occurring arsenic in it, and their water has been contaminated. And EPA is working through that, and they have a project acronyms called HAMP, Hopi Arsenic Mitigation Project. And I think last I spoke with them, they said something like they're hoping in 2026 to remediate one of the sites. But real challenge to have right from the beginning. You even get that water access, it's contaminated and unsafe for consumption. So then on the third, this is a challenge, I think, for many tribes, because if you looked at the census between 2010 and 2020, Native Americans, the population is growing. It increased quite a bit. And we're seeing a movement by our youth to, grasp on to their Indigenous identity. Many young people wanting to live on their reservation and traditional homelands, but the community doesn't have that structure there to support a growing population. And, aside from just being an aging infrastructure with the demands and changes of climate change, it's also putting additional stressors on existing systems that they can't handle. And so this map is taken from the Indian Health Service that manages a database. Again, it doesn't have every single home identified, but their sanitation facility construction program does track homes that are reported to them in collaboration with the tribe. And the bright red, those are homes that completely lack water coming in and sanitation going out. And then as you get from orange to yellow, the deficiency is less, so that the yellow would be, they're meeting water quality standards right now, but they need a routine maintenance or replacement, things like that. And so you can see, look at that, that's, very widely across different regions. And then finally, the O&M is, now this is something that, I'd feel pretty confident in saying every tribe was dealing with this challenge. And again, partly because of the historical relationship of the federal government and tribes, tribes were set up it was established to be reliant upon and dependent on the federal government, right? Take all these different elements that go into it. They can't tax tribal lands because they're held in trust for the tribe by the federal government. So it can be difficult to secure a revenue stream to support operation maintenance, right? This is a really complicated issue, but it's another intuitive thing. You have to maintain, you have to have water operators to operate the system, some way of ensuring that whether it's through a formal utility or whatever, but that providing that water, the lines and everything continue into the future and don't just fall into disarray because they weren't appropriately maintained. And again, that requires some expertise, some resources that is really challenging. And I'll turn it back to Bidtah then to talk on the different agencies briefly, and then kind of where we are now with IJA.
Next slide, I think next slide. So if it's not obvious to the students why the engineers are here, you got to learn to work with the people who are building the systems, and the people who are building the systems need to work with the policymakers and the lawyers. So a lot of what's great about this type of work and environmental work generally is that interdisciplinary nature of it. So we'll go to the next slide. So remember we said that there are 4 buckets. Like some people have absolutely no plumbing in their homes. There's no way to even get water into that. Then there's operations and maintenance, and I'm sure your engineers could talk to you ad nauseum about that, because you got to keep up your shiny new car, right? Because it won't be shiny new forever. We talked about water quality, and then, of course, I'm forgetting the last one. Pop quiz, what was the 4th one? Heather, what's the 4th one? Remind me.
Did you talk about replacing infrastructure?
Yeah, replacing infrastructure, which in my mind is, aging infrastructure. So it's aging infrastructure and O&M I often combine in my mind because they're so interrelated. But the reason I wanted to highlight that is so the work that Heather and I was doing in Colorado River was focused on like the Navajo Nation and other places. There are other tribes that have the same problem. There's just no infrastructure in place. California, when we talk about the 1 million people who lack access, it's about the aging infrastructure, the O&M, it's about water quality. So it's the story that Heather was telling. There are lots of people in the Central Valley that can turn a tap, but you shouldn't be drinking that water at all. So this slide is a little bit about myself. You've heard about me. So I work on the nation for 20 years. Why am I here in California? Because of this crazy slide. So I was recruited very heavily to come here to bring that tribal expertise, but then to help like the state water boards figure out how to help the tribal communities because of this morass of entities. So just remember, for all of you environmental studies people, not everything begins and ends with EPA. Not everything begins and ends with EPA. And I'd be curious to talk to Professor Yang about this during lunchtime to see what his views are on that. But because the federal government is a government of limited authority, there are so many different actors who have a little piece of the pie to make a holistic system. So in the work that we're doing, EPA and IHS are IHS is an entity within the Department of Health and Human Services. Those two are critical to getting clean drinking water systems to tribes. U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, that's more of a Colorado River thing. I take that back. I already met with a tribe who is getting funding from reclamation. That's within the Department of the Interior. So now I've already got 3 different departments in the federal government. Now I know that means nothing to the young people, but to us old people, we know it's like trying to get your driver's license from 4 different entities. Like you need, right? I mean, that's the best way I can explain it to people who don't know. Like to get a driver's license, you need to go to these 4 different entities. And then I really think if you're doing environmental studies, you really need to be focusing on ag, especially in California. That's where all the money is. Farm Bill, if you hear about the Farm Bill, that's where all the money is. as we got further and further into this research, Heather and I met an entity that's like, what are you doing? Stop everything and focus on the Farm Bill. You know, yeah, and I was like, oh my God, you're totally right. So that's the point of this slide. Next slide. So let me go on to the next slide because we wanted to talk about what's happening now and leave time for questions and answers. Yeah. Actually, just back up real fast. Mainly this is for Clare. This is an amazing, you got to look this guy up. I'll look his name up. He's an African-American doctor who came to the Navajo Nation in the 80s and just never left. And then he takes photos and then paints them in public spaces. I mean, he does amazing work. The New York Times covered him. But anyway, I think it's just a great example of like our activism and beautifying your community. All right, next slide. All right. So as I mentioned, you know, tectonic shifts are happening in society. And for the young people, you're going to be the ones to carry this on. Like, it's not going to be me, but it's going to be you. You're the ones that are going to have to keep the metal to the pedal, or the metal to whatever that saying is, the pedal to the metal. You know, everyone who went out in the streets and for George Floyd, you have to keep that movement and spirit going, because the political pendulum constantly swings back and forth, even in California. So the good news is, for the first time in the history of the Indian Health Service Sanitation Facilities Program, this program was created in the 1950s, and they were supposed to end the sanitation deficiencies. It's I call this such post-war, it's like war language, right? Sanitation and deficiency. It just means clean water, right? Then the 70s come along and the feds pass the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act, right? Again, showing you how people's shifting, right? Well, the program, the IHS program, Indian Health Service, was created in the 1950s to end the deficiencies. It was funded at about $90 million a year. 90 million. This is how much they needed to actually fully fund the program, 3.5 billion. So when we talk about eradication of culture and people, you see that in funding, right? If you're only giving people $90 million a year to deal with sanitation deficiency, when you know sanitation deficiency kills people, you wonder, are we really in self-determination? If you had, in July of 2019, before COVID broke out, if you had told me a pandemic is coming, it's going to ravage Indian country, and we know it's partly going to be because there's no access to clean drinking water, what will Congress do? I would have said absolutely nothing. Remember, Heather said that, like, this is not a new problem. Well, lo and behold, they did it. And I do want to thank, I think it was the activism in the streets, right? That Congress got Congress to wake up. And then we got more funding, as you can see, US EPA, that's called the State Revolving Fund. This fund helps to build clean drinking water systems and keep them safe. That fund is critical to non-Indian communities and Indian communities, but especially non-Indian communities. And then the Bureau of Reclamation got more money. So this is all really, really, really good news. That's, I think, the nice thing is we can actually honestly end on a positive note. Next slide. I'm not going to go through this because I don't think it matters to this group. Next slide. Okay, here's what I want to focus on, especially for you, Professor, because you're so locally focused. So one of the things that I also want to tell you about California history is, remember in the slide you saw treaty making? Well, treaty making ended in 1871, but the Navajo Nation has a treaty, and that's important because it's a piece of paper. It's a contract between the Navajo people and the federal government about how we are going to relate to each other, where our lands are, what commitments are made. And you hear broken treaty all the time. It's complicated, and I don't want to go down that. What I want to focus on is the word treaty. Because there are other tribes after 1871 who never got a treaty. They got what are called executive orders, and those are unilateral actions by the president, ergo the president can take them away. Whereas even this Supreme Court just 1 year ago held up the sacredness of treaties with tribes, because the only entity in the United States that can break or amend a treaty is US Congress. And if you can Google this right now, it's concerning Oklahoma and how much of Oklahoma is Indian country. And the Supreme Court said it's Indian country because Congress never took those treaties away. Now, yes, we know Oklahoma, you think Tulsa and you think all these cities. No, you're still in Indian country. That was, it was shocking, mainly because they followed the law. I mean, if you want to see stare decisis never applied, read federal Indian law, right? I think, anyway, we'll have that conversation later. But what I want you to know is in California, the federal government came out, negotiated treaties, and California fought them. This is another part of the tragic history of California. And if the California had not fought those treaties, 1/3 of California would be federal Indian reservation, 1/3. Now, I'm suspecting there's probably implicit bias happening, and it's like, well, that's scary. It's better the way that it's better than it is the way it is right now. Well, Arizona, you would look a lot more like Arizona, which is 1/4 Indian reservation. And I know that there's a whole California, Arizona divide. I'm originally from New Mexico. We're like the redheaded stepchildren to Texas and Arizona and California. But the point is you still had massive non-Indian development in Arizona, massive. And today in this world, I mean, you have to understand how old I am. Like, when I was a kid, it's like, oh, reservations poor, the worst, and now, especially environmental people are like, thank you. I mean, you've saved land, you didn't overdevelop it, you didn't concrete it. So some of the, most untarnished land in the United States is on Indian reservations. So digression. But what I want, if you're really interested in the work, go onto their website, go onto the SAFER website, and that second link, you will read about the work that the state of California is doing to address tribal drinking water needs. If I had more time, I would show you how the work they're doing correlates directly to that slide that I showed you about those 4 agencies. But you can go onto the website and read it. I think just one more tidbit about California Indian history is the Franciscans, missionized right? They were the ones behind the mission. You probably already know this, right? That it was supposed to originally be the Jesuits. And it's interesting. That to me is a tragic turn of events, because I think it would have been a lot different if the Jesuits had missionized. Maybe I'm biased, I don't know, but I worked very closely with the Jesuits for a number of years. And one of them actually ran a rose garden. So you really took me back through my history. I'm good friends with a Jesuit down in Nicaragua fighting the good fight now. I think it would have been a lot of a big different history. So sort of neither here nor there, except, they're still pretty powerful. The church is still pretty powerful. But really what to end on is environmental work is all about the community. Know your community. Know the people living there. This is an exciting time where environmental work is about people and not just about, protecting that tree for the tree, but it's like, how do we interact with our environment and listening to human voices and recognizing that we live with Mother Nature, despite all the efforts to pretend that she doesn't control us. I think, California is being reminded of that right now with the drought and all of that. So last slide is our contact information, and we've saved 5 minutes for questions. And I hope, but I guess, Heather, did you want to say anything in closing? I should have let her.
No, I thought that was and I think that is the takeaway. There are capacity needs, and we could go in for a while about what does that mean and stuff, but to put it bluntly, non-natives for a while will need to help build back up Native communities. I mean, we're 3% of attorneys, same with every professional field, the teachers, the physicians, the engineers. There's just not a lot of us, and there's many pipeline efforts in the works. And so hopefully that number will increase. But I think that's why everyone in the room and online, like, you can help these communities, but that involves, taking time to educate yourself and helping to ensure that they're community-driven solutions. And I keep bringing up the boarding school because it's like such a great example of like educating Native kids. Yes, everybody would say, let's do that. But the way they did it without that community input, very, very harmful, incredibly detrimental, still feeling it today. Just imagine how that would have gone if the federal government had come into the tribal leaders. How can we educate your people? And then listen to the tribal leaders and had it be a community-driven effort. So that's just, same thing here with our environmental water work, resource development has to be involving the community. And then there's opportunities a lot to mentor someone from the community so that they replace you, right? Anyway, that's all. Any questions, how they're going to manage that?
Okay, so much, Heather. I just want to make sure that those who are participating remotely, they can type questions into the chat. If anyone in the room has questions, we're happy to take them.
Yeah, I was curious if you could elaborate more in detail about some of the work you're doing in California on the accessibility to water rights and clean water.
So for the clean water, it's really being run by the state water boards. And there's a wonderful woman named Adriana Renteria, who's their tribal liaison. So I was brought in to really kind of help them navigate their space. What they're engaged in right now is called a tribal needs assessment. And she is meeting regularly with the federal agencies that I just mentioned to understand what's out there, what data is out there, what's not out there. And let me just end there. Hopefully that's responsive, because I could talk forever about this and don't want to get people too lost. At the end of the day, what really matters on this sort of issue about access to clean drinking water is you want to know who's running the system. So if you pay a water bill, who are you paying it for? What are they doing? Are they in compliance with environmental regulations or are they not? And if you're not paying a water bill, yikes, where are you getting your water from? Because is it actually being treated? And then should you even be drinking it? And if you are flushing a toilet, do you know where it's going? The US EPA has told me in meetings that there are places where the sewage is just going out to like a little pond right there, which is incredibly dangerous to human health and other things. And we can talk more about in more detail if you want more detail on what. So what I'm doing, my specific role is to help them understand and navigate that jurisdictional maze that exists out there. And then how do we put the pieces of the puzzle together to make a whole, so that ultimately California is meeting its constitutional or statutory mandate that every Californian, regardless of citizenship, has access to clean drinking water. That's pretty exciting.